highest civilization and in nations with the highest proficiency in the arts, unquote. As one might suspect, apologists are not without excuses to prettify what can only be described as a terrible injustice. On page 93 in the book entitled I'm Glad You Asked, apologists Boa and Moody say, quote, slavery as we now understand it is quite different from the kind of slavery permitted in the Bible. Slaves were to be treated with human dignity and respect, and if their masters violated their basic rights or abused them, they were to be set free. Although the New Testament also allowed for slavery, the epistles make it clear that all believers have an equal standing before the Father, unquote. What kind of reasoning is this? Slavery with a less barbaric face is still slavery. And when Deuteronomy 15:17 says that you can take an awl and thrust it through your slave's ear and make him your slave forever, that hardly comes under the heading of treating people with dignity and respect. Secondly, the New Testament did not just allow or permit slavery. It actively promoted and maintained it. The words allow and permit are nothing more than a nice veneer for a corrupt situation. That's why the following common defense borders on the bizarre. On page 123 in the book entitled Why I Believe, apologist D. James Kennedy, you've probably seen him on religious TV shows, said, what brought an end to ancient slavery was the gospel of Jesus Christ. Is he serious? Where did Jesus in particular, or the Bible in general, ever denounce slavery? On page 40 in the book entitled The Bible Has the Answer, two apologetic compatriots of Kennedy, Morris and Clark, who are also strong believers in the Bible, are much more candid and disagree with him by saying Jesus, quote, lived in a time and place where slavery itself was a significant social institution, but he never spoke against it. Clearly, they are more willing to admit the obvious than Kennedy. But they follow this up by saying, quote, slavery was eventually abolished through the moral influence of Christianity, not by means of civil disobedience and revolution stirred up by Christians. How wrong can you get? Slavery was abolished despite the thrust of Christian teachings, not because of them. Christianity, the Bible, the churches, and the clergy were the last to yield to the tide of history, not the first to lead the attack. On page 109 in the book entitled Mark Twain and the Three R's, Maxwell Geismar quotes Mark Twain, of course he's the well-known writer and humanist, as saying the following. This is said by Mark Twain, quote, there was no place in the land where the seeker could not find some small budding sign of pity for the slave. No place in all the land but one, the pulpit. It yielded at last. It always does. It fought a strong and stubborn fight and then did what it always does. It joined the procession at the tail end. Slavery fell. Although the slavery text in the Bible remained, the practice changed. That was all. But undoubtedly, the most candid admission is found on page 384 of the book entitled Problem Text by the ultra-fundamentalist Peter Ruckman, founder of the Pensacola Bible Institute. He states, quote, George DeHoff, on page 154 in the book entitled Alleged Bible Contradictions, tells us that God abolished slavery by a process of teaching and instructing the people, which is about as wild a statement as was ever made on commercial television. God never abolished slavery a day since it started. and he quotes 1 Timothy 6, 1-3 and 1 Corinthians 7:21 to prove his case. Well, it's nice to know that there's at least one apologist willing to admit the truth. So in essence, what can we say regarding the last 5 programs? The only sensible conclusion to be drawn is that the Bible is saturated with injustices, inequities, miscarriages, unfairness, and abuses. In a word, far too many key elements in the Bible are rotten deals and a crying shame. The remainder of this program will be devoted to 3 letters we received several years ago. The first says, quote, "I'd like to subscribe to your publication. I need sources to refute statements made by people who write letters to the editor of our newspaper expounding on the Bible and the inerrancy of the Bible." In response, I said, "Welcome aboard. We are only too happy to provide information to someone who is confronting biblicists on their own turf by way of the media. You are engaged in that which goes to the very reason for our periodical's existence. Many newspapers provide an exceptionally one-sided presentation of the Bible, not only because it panders to their readers, but it caters to their advertisers. And, of course, one must not overlook the obvious fact that editors have religious views as well." Our second letter is from Michigan and says, quote, "2 weeks ago, I went to an office store in Flint, and as I was getting out of my car, a minister approached and asked if I was saved, believed in Jesus, and all the other nonsense that they believe it is their responsibility to